Christian Parenting.
Well, hey there, friend. Welcome back to the Journey podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Pitts, and I'm really excited just to share with you today really about this idea of paying attention, or what I'll call today practicing attentiveness. And there's a quote by a guy that I really have learned to love through reading one of his books. His name's Leighton Ford. Leighton Ford spent a lot of time with the evangelist, late evangelist, Billy Graham. And then his book, The Attentive Life, Discerning God's Presence in All Things, Leighton would say, paying attention is not a way by which we make something happen, but a way to see what is already given to us. I'm going to say that one more time. Paying attention is not a way by which we make something happen, but a way to see what is already given to us. That's Leighton Ford. You know, I talked a lot in the last episode about just this idea of making sense of your own story. The reason I'm sharing my story is because I want to help you make sense of yours. There's just a reality to our stories that there's a lot happening. And to the degree that we actually pay attention will be to the degree that we actually see what is actually happening in our lives. And I shared this quote by a guy named Kirk Thompson, which he said, to the degree that a parent makes sense of their story will be to the degree that a child can make sense of theirs. And so I'm sharing my story, making sense of my story, in hopes that you can make sense of yours, and that as you make sense of yours, your children or those around you that you do life with can make sense of theirs because you're owning yours and understanding fully what's happening. Yeah, so I'm really thoughtful a lot about the benefits of paying attention to our lives and the benefits to paying attention to the things that are happening in our lives. And, you know, the last thing I shared in the last podcast was really just my story of losing my wife, Wynter. And obviously it was a significant time in my life, a significant time of loss in my life. But I decided, and I couldn't have articulated this in the moment, but I decided in that moment to own Philippians 4:8, whatever is true and right and honorable and pure and lovely and admirable, and if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, to think about those things. And so I didn't really know what I was doing at the time other than living out a scripture that I thought I'd believed my whole life, which I'm grateful for now, and I'm grateful I can look back and give language to what was actually happening. But the reason I was able to do that, I think in part, was because God was really, really blatant. I mean, incredibly blatant in some of the things that he wanted me to see and some of the things that he wanted me to pay attention to. I look back at some of those moments. I'm going to share a few of them with you today. But I look back at those moments and I just am really grateful that God gave me these big magnified moments of, I cannot ignore what he's doing in my life right now, despite the immense pain. And I'm talking specifically about the day that Wynter died. There are three specific things that happened the day that Wynter died that allowed me to see maybe what was happening that was a part of the greater narrative that I could have missed, but they were so hope-giving for me. And I'm really grateful for them because it gave me a different perspective on my life, on my loss, even on what I was going through, even in the darkness of the moments, because there's no doubt about it. That was the darkest day of my life. Losing Wynter, honestly, trying to save her life, going through those moments and through those movements from the bedroom where she was, where I noticed that she wasn't breathing, to CPR on the floor in the same room, to having to communicate with my girls at the same time, to going to the hospital, to hearing all the things that are happening in the emergency room as they're working on her body and trying to get her life back. Yeah, most daunting, difficult, dark, terrifying moments of my life. But into that day, God threw some significant moments that just allowed me to hold on to hope. I guess today I just want to share a couple of those stories with you. And I guess as I share those stories with you, I want you to be thinking about the things in your life, maybe some hard moments you've had in your life where God's gone out of his way to magnify something greater, to kind of pull your attention away a little bit from maybe what you're going through. Or maybe some days where maybe you missed that and you noticed it later. I don't know. But I just want to kind of share a couple of these stories with you because they were so massive in my life. And maybe it'll just give you a little bit of perspective. But let's start with the first story. The first one, I'll just call it the run. But the morning that Wynter passed away, it was July 24th, 2018. I decided to take a run. We had been traveling, and we were actually staying at a guest house in Dallas, which was the city that we had lived in for 14 years that we had moved away from as we had moved to Nashville just 2 weeks before her passing. But that morning, we're staying in this guest house, a house that belonged to her cousin. I was really tired, but instead of just sleeping in, one of the things I discovered about myself is that I do a lot better when I get up in the mornings and take a run. In fact, I did that this morning. I probably slept a good 5 hours last night and could have slept longer, but my body got up. So I took a 4.5 mile run, just decided to start my morning in a different way to just kind of get a fresh start, get my heart pumping. And so that morning I woke up, I'll never forget, my feet, my alarm going off on my phone and my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor in that home that we were staying in. There were these grooves in the hardwood that I'll never forget as my feet kind of walked across them. And so I actually went into the restroom and just tried to wake myself up, use the restroom, actually open my phone up just to try to get my mind stimulated. And I'll never forget, there was actually an article, which I'll refer back to, or it was actually an email in my inbox, and it said in the subject line, "Do you have an exit strategy?" And I simply thought it was being in leadership, nonprofit leadership. I actually thought it was a blog or some sort of article about leadership transitions. And so I just kind of filed it away in my head and just moved on with my morning. And so I, splashed some water on my face, and Wynter was sleeping gently and quietly in the bed. And so as I exited, I tried to do so in a way as to not wake her up, because I never wanted to wake her up on mornings like that, because she loved to sleep in. And so I got out on this road, and it was actually in the country of Texas, this little town called Midlothian, beautiful little sleepy town. And I remember getting out on the road, and it was a really dark road, and there was no shoulder on this road. And so I was running in the complete pitch black dark. And I turned on some music, actually some motivational music. I was listening to an album that is made up, a guy named Stephen Furtick, who's a pastor. He has like these motivational talks they are set to music beds. I think it's called The God of Jacob. And so I was listening to that with just kind of getting myself going. And I ran about 1.5 miles out on this dark road. And by the time I got out to the end of the road, about 1.5 miles out, the sun was just starting to peek out. And I turned around to make my way back towards the house. And in the house, Wynter was sleeping. My 4 daughters were sleeping. And I'll never forget this intense feeling of needing to pray for my girls. And so I started to pray for my girls one by one, name by name, and had this intense sense to pray for them and for their safety and for their futures. And I guess in that moment, I thought it related to just the fact that we were moving. We'd already bought a house in Nashville. We had left the city that we loved in Dallas, although we were there on that day. We were starting a whole new life. My girls were starting a new school. I was starting a new job as a pastor in the Franklin, Tennessee area. We were starting just a whole new leg of our lives after 14 years in Dallas doing one thing. And so I thought it related to that. But I said those prayers each for my girls individually. And I ran back into the house. I remember getting back in, trying to remain quiet so they could just continue sleeping. And I moved on with my day. Obviously, I had no idea how much Alina, then 14, Caitlin, then 12, and Cameron and Olivia, then 9 years old, how much they would need those prayers. Because as we would go into that night, they would experience the worst night of their life, and I would experience the worst night of my life. And I'm just so grateful to God for, I believe, just by the Holy Spirit just dropping in my mind a desire and a need to pray for them. And that night I would be thinking about that run, and what would happen is the prayers that I would be praying for my girls that evening would be a continuation of the prayers that I was praying that morning, which was just a continuation of something that I believe was just Spirit given. Little did I know how much we'd need it. Just going back to that quote by Leighton Ford, paying attention is not a way by which we make something happen, but a way to see what is already given to us. I just honestly believe that was the first of a couple of things that God would do just to help me to pay attention and to remind me that evening, as I thought about that morning and that run, it just seemed like a gift that God would give me to already have this appetite and this desire to really just petition for my girls before Him. And it was God asking me, I believe, to discern His presence in all things. That day would continue, and I would actually, Wynter wouldn't pass away until about 7:30 that evening. So I went, I got ready after my run and actually went into my office. I was finishing up my last week of work for the Urban Alternative, which is the ministry that I was running for a man named Dr. Tony Evans, and I was just saying goodbye to my coworkers. It was a Tuesday, and I was going to be there until that Friday, and I had a bunch of tasks to get done, including saying goodbye and filling out some process and procedure kind of documents to help the team that would be taking over as I was leaving. And there was one task that I actually had to do that was actually very personal, and that was tied to a book that Wynter and I had co-authored together. We'd actually co-authored a book a few years earlier called She Is Yours, Trusting God as You Raise the Girl He Gave You, and that book came out in 2017. But then we had been working on a book called Emptied, Experiencing the Fullness of a Poured Out Marriage, which was a book we had just finished, I guess about 2 months before this day, and it was one we had turned in, and our publisher had sent the book back to us, asking us to sign off on the final manuscript. And so the personal task that I had ahead of me was actually just signing the final kind of a transcript approval document. And so it was about 3:45 on that day where I knew I was about to leave the office because I had some personal errands to run. And so I printed out that form, which was the approval form, and I actually signed my name. And this wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't a big deal. It was just a part of the process we had to go through, and we'd already turned the book in, but I'd signed my name, and then I knew Wynter was great with the book, and so I actually signed her name on the form as well. Don't tell my publisher. And I would actually scan that form and email that form back to the publisher at 3:45. What I know now that I didn't know at the time is that I was actually signing off on the final edited manuscript of what would become a time capsule of our marriage. That book, Experiencing the Fullness of a Poured Out Marriage, Emptied, Experiencing the Fullness of a Poured Out Marriage, is really a document of our entire story. I like to break up our marriage in 3 5-year segments. We were married for 15 years and 27 days, and I would say the first 5 years were us just discovering that if we were going to have a quality marriage, it would require us giving up more than we ever thought we would give up. And so the second 5 years were us making a decision to pursue giving up those things. And then those final 5 years were us experiencing the benefits of having poured our lives out for each other. Philippians chapter 2 says, although Jesus was equal with God, he didn't consider his equality with God as something to be taken advantage of, but rather emptied himself and took on the form of a servant and emptied himself even to the point of death. And so this book was based on that scripture, but it was really our experience and our journey of having lived that out and seeing the benefit of that. And it wasn't like a how-to as much as it was a join us in the journey. But I would come to realize, I guess it was within maybe the first day or 2 days after Wynter passed, that book would be the final picture of what our marriage was, and we were able to document the entire thing. And it was really beautiful. So now when I think about Wynter and I think about who she was to me, the gift that she was from God, I can't help but think about the fact that God gave us this gift of a book and a document, and it's a massive thing. It's not a little thing. Again, paying attention is not a way by which we make something happen, but a way to see what is already given to us. And that book, Emptied, was a gift to me. And, it was actually really beautiful. I feel like it was a gift to Wynter and I, because as we were working on that book, God had given us a little more than a year of time to really reflect on what he had done in both of us individually, how he had worked on us and how he had grown us, but then also what he had given us in our marriage and our friendship and our intimacy. And so I think it was a gift to work on it leading into her passing, but then it was a gift to me to know that God is that kind and that good and that exacting in his timing, that he would give me such a gift in such an incredible moment. And that, my friends, was something that I had to discern and see God's presence in. I did. It was a massive gift. It's still a massive gift. That book would release 6 months later, 6 months after Wynter passed away. And I would get to tell our story over and over and over again and be grateful over and over and over again for the woman that God had given me and the gift that he had given me in her, and the fact that he wanted to stamp that with his approval through this book. Yeah, just really, really, really grateful for that gift. Now, both of those stories I just told, first that run that morning, and then turning in the book, both of those things happened prior to Wynter passing away. So I turned the book in at about 3:45, and she would pass away at about 7:45 that evening. And what's interesting is those two stories happened before she passed away, but I wouldn't really kind of reckon with the thoughts and the realities of what they meant to me until a little bit of time after, maybe a day or two after, with both of those things. But the next story I'm going to tell is one that actually happened just a few hours after she passed away. But the impact of this one I felt in the moment, like God was speaking to me in the moment. And so, from 7:45 that evening, which is about the time that Wynter started experiencing heart failure or a heart rhythm defect, till about midnight, those hours were the darkest hours of my life. And I remember them really, really vividly. I remember the darkness. I remember the fear. I remember the panic, all of it really, really vividly. I don't think I'll ever forget it. But that evening, we left the hospital. We'll never forget leaving Wynter at that hospital. I remember just the feeling of caring for a woman for so long, 15 years, 27 days, caring for her for so long, and then having to leave her body at that hospital. It's the most foreign feeling. I don't even know how to describe it other than being something that felt like it was out of my character, to like not protect my wife, to not be with her, to leave her in a situation that I couldn't do anything about. I don't have any way to describe how that made me feel other than really, really sad. I would actually get in the car with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Wynter's brother Sean, his wife Andrea, and they would drive me back to their house, a different house than we were at. And I just remember getting back to their house and being surrounded by family. Some of Wynter's cousins were there, and some uncles and some aunts and just different people that were in our lives. And I just remember being there and all of us just sitting there really quietly with nothing to say. And I remember at one point, my girls are there with all this family, and people are caring for my girls, and I'm just kind of shell-shocked. And so at one point I went into the guest bedroom where I would be kind of setting up shop for the next week or two, week and a half. And I remember going in there and just trying to have to get my head off of, what was happening. And so I went on my phone, opened up my phone, and I would go back to that subject line in my email that said, "Do you have an exit strategy?" And it turns out that what I thought was an article on leadership transitions actually ended up being a devotional on, actually adapted from a book by a guy named Randy Frazee called "What Happens After You Die." And I began to read the devotional. And I'll just summarize the story for you. But Randy begins telling a story about learning how to water ski as a younger guy. And he basically says it takes him a long time, but he learns how to get up on his skis. And after he gets up on his skis, he starts to realize that he doesn't know how to get down off of his skis. And so he just begins circling the lake as he rides on his water skis just around the lake. He's trying to figure out, how do I get down? If I just let go of this rope, I'm going to crash and burn. I'm going to hurt myself. And he's just going around the lake, and he realizes that his friends in the back of the boat are yelling, "Just let go of the rope. Just let go of the rope." And he's afraid to let go of the rope because he has no idea what's going to happen. And he goes on to tell the story of basically deciding finally to let go of the rope. And as soon as he lets go of the rope, he realizes that his body just slowly descends below the surface of the water. And what he thought was going to be this excruciating, painful, difficult process of getting down off of his skis actually ended up being a beautiful, slow, methodical process of ending his journey on his water skis. And he likened that to the process of what it looks like for the believer in Jesus Christ to die and leave this world, regardless of how they leave this world. Let me just read to you real quick what Randy says in his book. He says, "What is the exit strategy for the Christian? If I said yes to Christ in this life, what happens to me when I die, when I let go of the rope? The Bible has much to say about this that will calm your nerves, loosen your death grip on life, and give you hope. Consider the words of Paul in his letter to the Corinthian believers." Then he quotes 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 through chapter 5, 1, which I'm going to read. He says, "Therefore, do not lose heart." Paul says this, "Do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know that if this earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands." Now you got to remember, I'm reading this devotional maybe 2 hours after leaving the hospital, about 4 hours or 5 hours after Wynter passes away, in an emotional state of leaving my wife at this hospital or leaving her body at this hospital and having all this fear and all this terror. And into that moment, God sends me this article or this devotional. Do you have an exit strategy? And I'm telling you now, if I wasn't paying attention before on that day, I was paying attention now. Because it's funny because I've said this a few times. You get a lot of different types of devotionals in your inbox if you're a Christian and you subscribe to all these different plans. But it's not very often that you get these days devotionals about death. Death is something even for, I think, a lot of Christian writers and just the era that we're in right now. A lot of people don't want to deal with death or talk about what happens after you die or talk about heaven or talk about hell. So to get that devotional into my inbox on that morning that I can read that night was massive for my faith and for my eyes to be open. There was not any way I couldn't pay attention in that moment. And it was like God was teaching me the art and the practice of paying attention or practicing attentiveness. And I would actually not only read that myself, but I would walk back out into the living room where all of my family was sitting. And I would read that entire devotional, his story of water skiing and gently gliding down underneath the surface of the water. And I would read that verse in 2 Corinthians. Not only would it give me strength, but it would give my family strength. And yet again, God gave me this moment to discern his presence in all things. It was one of the most beautiful, difficult, obviously, painful, but one of the most beautiful moments of my life where I just knew that God was speaking directly to me. And it was as if he were just telling me, Jonathan, pay attention. Like, I know this is hard. I know this is difficult. I know this is painful, but just pay attention. I wish I could tell you that I always have moments like that with God where he's just kind of opening my eyes to what he's doing, and I'm just discerning all the time what he's doing in my life as different circumstances pop up and different difficulties pop up. But here I am, just a couple of years removed from, this moment, and I find myself constantly not seeing what needs to be seen and constantly not paying attention to what really is happening. The reality is you can only make sense of what you see, and you can only see what you're paying attention to. And so there's a statement and a prayer that Leighton Ford says in his book, The Attentive Life, that he encourages the reader to pray. And it's really simple. He says, Lord, show me what I'm missing. I think it's really, really beautiful, and something that I should do, that you should do on a regular basis, is just ask God or tell God, Lord, show me what I'm missing, so that in the moments when we're in circumstances that we don't want to be in, that we didn't ask for, that are really, really difficult, that are really hard, that are really painful, we can actually see what God is actually doing behind the scenes. Remember, I said the last podcast, I said there's this quote by Tony Evans that says, if all we see is what we see, we will never see all there is to be seen. And so I would just encourage you to ask the question, Lord, show me what I'm missing. Show me what I can see that I'm not seeing right now, so that I can have a different perspective on the circumstance that I find myself in right now. My hope for me, my hope for you is that God's always just blowing our minds with, just opening our eyes, because it's so hard to not pay attention to what he's doing. That was that day for me. Those three things: the run, turning in the book, and then reading that devotional, Do You Have an Exit Strategy? Those were three things that were just massively eye-opening for me, and things that I just hung on to for hope when times got really, really hard and really, really tough, which they did, because it's easy for me to talk over and kind of glaze through my story now. But the reality is, every single one of those days and every single one of those hours and every single one of those moments and the days that would precede Wynter's death were the hardest of my life and most painful and difficult and dark. Ultimately, I find myself back in this place again. Lord, show me what I'm missing. Show me what I'm missing. And, the challenges with even raising my girls right now, and the challenges with being a single dad, and the challenges with all these decisions I have to make on my own because my wife is not here. It's like, Lord, show me what I'm missing. What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me? Wynter's good. She's with you. You told me that in the exit strategy devotional. I can trust that. But show me what I'm missing that you need me to see now in order to have hope and to be inspired. Remember, paying attention is not a way by which we make something happen, but a way to see what is already given to us. I guess my final question to you is, will you take the time to pay attention and see in order to make sense of it all in your own life?